Most people tend to blend the birth stories of Jesus found within the Gospels of Luke and Matthew. But they're really two very different stories. In Luke's Gospel, we're presented with angels singing in the fields, announcing the birth of Jesus to some lowly shepherds. And after the shepherds see with their very own eyes the baby Jesus lying contentedly in a manger, the story concludes with them glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen. Not so in Matthew's Gospel. Matthew's Gospel introduces us to King Herod, known to be a paranoid egomaniac who ruled through fear and threats. And instead of poor shepherds gazing upon the Christ child, we're given a glimpse of foreign astrologers come to worship the baby, whom they describe as destined to be King of the Jews. They're just as overwhelmed with joy as the shepherds in Luke's version, but instead of reporting to Herod as he had asked, they outsmarted him, slipping out of the country without detection. And we breathe a sigh of relief for them and presumably for the Holy Family. But that's not the end of the story. In fact, it's only the beginning. Unlike Luke's angelic chorus of peace on earth, goodwill to all people, Matthew gives us a story of political confrontation, one in which Jesus' birth is a threat to established power as personified by King Herod. We're told by the gospel writer that with the arrival of the Magi, Herod was frightened and all Jerusalem with him. And when tyrants are afraid, people are never safe. Joseph learns through a dream that he and his family aren't safe. They have become the targets of Herod's paranoia and fury. But they are also bearers of God's presence in the world. Through them, through Joseph, Mary, and the infant Jesus, God will enter history as a vulnerable, displaced, and hunted child by a crazed tyrant. But Herod is more than an evil villain. He's a symbol of empire when it's threatened by truth. So let me be clear about what I mean when I say empire. When I say empire, I'm talking about more than ancient kingdoms of history like the Roman Empire or the Babylonian Empire. I'm talking about any system that benefits the few. I'm talking about unchecked power, power that is so convinced of its own righteousness that it normalizes cruelty and calls it order. Empire is what we're taught not to question. It promises security, but only through the sacrifice of the vulnerable. In short, empire is any system that demands our loyalty and insists that some lives matter more than others. Herod personifies empire in today's text. He is any ruler, past or present, who clings to power through fear and who distorts truth. And so our story is not a happily ever after story in which the villain is outsmarted by the innocent truth-telling magi. This story, this Christmas story, is a story that speaks directly to today's realities of families fleeing violence, of children crossing borders, and of parents making impossible choices to protect their lives. Matthew's gospel refuses to end the story with the Magi's joy. Instead, it forces readers to confront state-sponsored terror. Herod, enraged at being outwitted by the Magi, creates mayhem when he orders the slaughter of all boys under 2 years of age in Bethlehem and in the surrounding area. And although there's no record of this event in any historical text other than our Bible, the act is consistent with what we know of Herod's ego-driven brutality. Remember, when empire is threatened, no one is safe. This account of the empire-sanctioned mass slaughter of infants is one of the most disturbing passages in the New Testament. But Matthew doesn't try to explain it away. He offers no justification, no divine rationale, no claim that it was meant to be. Matthew's gospel doesn't whitewash or sanitize the circumstances surrounding the birth of Jesus. He doesn't rush past the sounds of mothers' loud howls of grief and the screams in the night over the senseless deaths of their children. And neither should we. Matthew tells the truth that the world into which Jesus is born is violent, unjust, and deadly, especially for children. It's at this point in the story that we want God to intervene. We want God to step in and fix everything as if it were a fairy tale. But the gospel writer does something braver and harder than giving us a fairy tale. Matthew offers hope. He reminds us that the light of Christ doesn't make the world less dangerous. Instead, it makes the danger visible, and it refuses to let darkness pretend that it is God. So, where is the hope? Where was God 2,000 years ago, and where is God today when a family slips into the night, leaving everything and everyone behind that has any meaning for them? Where is God when, out of fear for their lives, they cross borders, hoping to make a new life in an unfamiliar land that might not welcome them? Where was God when babies were massacred by an insane tyrant? And where is God today when children are starving to death within war-torn countries and being gunned down in schools and on the streets? Matthew tells us that hope is not found in the absence of Herods or their violence. Hope is rooted in the truth that Herods don't get the last word. That love eventually wins out. That resurrection follows the cruelty of crucifixion. Hope lies in the quiet resistance of Magi, who through an act of civil disobedience refused to obey Herod, but return home by another way. Their obedience to God doesn't undo the damage, but their refusal to collaborate with violence still matters. Hope is found in the people who leave cans of food and winter wear in an outdoor pantry, knowing that it's not enough and it will never be enough, but someone will benefit, even while others continue to suffer. Hope lies in a family that takes the necessary action to escape terror. A family that's willing to risk their very lives as they cross borders to start life over again. And hope is in a grassroots coalition that forms to rescue families from the Herods of our day. Hope lies in a God who does not abandon us in our deepest and most profound grief. A God who doesn't show up to exempt us from grief, but instead one who remains in solidarity with us in the midst of it. A God who is incarnated in the flesh and blood of human beings who sit quietly with the person who mourns. The deepest hope in this morning's text is not that God stopped the violence, but that God never stopped being present. The light of Christ doesn't make the world less dangerous, but it makes the danger visible, and it refuses to let darkness pretend that it's holy or necessary or ordained by God. The light of Christ shines when we call out racism, homophobia, or transphobia, when we hear it or read it. It shines when we stand against anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. We are the light of Christ when we treat unhoused people with respect and when we resist fear-based actions against immigrants. The light of Christ shines when we join others in peaceful protests, when we contact our legislators about justice issues, and when we vote. Matthew doesn't give us a story in which God swoops in to stop the violence. He gives us a story in which God enters it. God doesn't stop Herod, but instead slips past him as a vulnerable refugee infant in the arms of a terrified mother and faithful follower. Our hope then is not that Herods will disappear, but that they do not get the last word. Ours is a hope that looks like Magi who refuse to cooperate with violence and go home by another way. It looks like parents who flee so their children might live. And hope looks like a God who does not abandon us in our grief. Not a God who spares us from suffering, but a God who remains with us in it. This is the dangerous world Christ is born into. And this is the dangerous world God refuses to abandon. Amen.